Good evening and welcome to the 7th ICG 2020s Development Dialogue brought to you by the International Centre Goa. Today we are deeply honored to have with us Dr. Kasturirangan, Chairman of the committee that drafted the new National Education Policy. Dr. Kasturirangan will be in discussion with Mr. Dattaraj Salgaocar, Vice President of the International Centre Goa, on Transforming India, National Education Policy NEP 2020. First, I invite Mr. Yatin Kakodkar, President ICG, for his introductory remarks.
Good evening and a warm welcome to the International Centre Goa and to the 7th webinar program of the series 2020s Development Dialogue. The topic today is Transforming India, National Education Policy 2020, and the speaker is Dr. Kasturirangan. We are very privileged to have with us Dr. Kasturirangan, whose contribution to India's development in various sectors is legion. A multifaceted individual, he has excelled in various capacities: a scientist, technologist, administrator, visionary, and thought leader. As chairman of Indian Space and Research Organization for 9 years, from 1994 to 2003, he was instrumental in steering India's space program to greater heights, including the launch and operationalization of India's prestigious Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle and Geosynchronous Launch Vehicle, which led to India's first mission to Moon in 2008. Earlier, as director of ISRO Satellite Center, he oversaw the growth and development of new generation satellites, including INSAT-2 and Indian remote sensing satellites IRS-1A and 1B, as well as other scientific, ocean observation and Earth observation and civilian satellites. Indeed, Dr. Kasturirangan has played a major role in propelling India's space program amongst the top in the world. In his distinguished career devoted to public service, he has also been a member of Rajya Sabha from 2003 to 2009 and a member of the Planning Commission from 2009 to 2014. As India's leading policymaker, his finest hour was the release of New Education Policy 2020. As chairman of the committee that drafted the New Education Policy, he will have played a leading role in bringing about a paradigm shift in the education system in India in the years to come. In recognition of his yeoman service to science and technology, he is the recipient of several awards, including the Brock Medal in 2004, Alan D. Emil Memorial Award in 2004, Theodore von Karman Award in 2007, and Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award in 1983. Dr. Kasturirangan is the recipient of all three of India's highest civilian honors: Padma Shri in 1982, Padma Bhushan in 1992, and Padma Vibhushan in 2000. At present, Dr. Kasturirangan is Chancellor, Central University of Rajasthan, Chairman Governing Board, Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics, Chairperson, NIIT, University Nimrana, Member, Atomic Energy Commission, and Emeritus Professor at National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore. In conversation with Dr. Kasturirangan is Mr. Dattaraj Salgaocar. Mr. Salgaocar is the chairman of the Goa-based VM Salgaocar Corporation Private Limited with a presence in hospitality, real estate, and private equity. He is passionate about education and the arts, and his foundation runs schools and colleges in Goa. He founded the Sunapram Goa Center for the Arts in 2007, which has transformed the Goan cultural landscape. He's a production engineer from Vijayanagar Bombay University and an MBA from Wharton Business School. Mr. Salgaocar is a founder member of ICG, Vice President of ICG, and chairs the ICG Programs Committee. Before we start, the ICG is pleased to announce that the speaker for the next webinar in the second half of July is the Venerable Tenzin Priyadarshi, Director of the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Societies, MIT, Boston. I now hand over the session to Mr. Salgaocar, and I hope you find it interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Yatin. And once again, I warmly welcome Dr. Kasturirangan. Thank you very much, sir, for giving us the honor and the privilege of your presence with us, and thank you for your time. I will straight away go on with your permission. Sir, you are one of the most respected and celebrated scientists. You have headed some of the most prestigious institutions in the country like ISRO and the National Institute of Advanced Studies. Can you tell us something about your early life? Your schooling in Kochi, how you moved to Bombay later for college and university, and finally to Ahmedabad for a PhD from the Physical Research Laboratory. Dr. Kasturirangan.
Thank you. With your permission, I will say a few words before I get to the answer your question. I would like to thank the President, Mr. Yassin Kakodkar, yourself, Mr. Raj Salgaocar ji, my esteemed friend, Dr. Mashelkar, whom I don't see, but I'm sure he's around, Director of ICG, other functionaries and distinguished invitees, guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you, Mr. Raj Salgaocar, for this privilege of being with all of you today evening to participate in your interesting program, ICG 2020s Developmental Dialogue. It's indeed a matter of privilege for me simply because of the fact that most erudite and well-accomplished people are part of this very interesting and very important institution, the International Centre Goa. And when you invited me to give this talk or a part of the dialogue, certainly I was very thrilled because of the fact that I do know Goa. I have visited Goa many times. I've interacted with the peoples in Goa. I have traveled, and in the whole process, even talking on an online basis is a great gift for me at this phase of my life to recapitulate many of my very pleasant memories of Goa. So I thank you, the Vice President, Rajji, for this opportunity. Well, responding to your question, I was born in Kerala, in the city of Ernakulam at the time. It was in the Cochin state in 1940. And of course, there was a tragedy in the family. I lost my mother early in my life, 33 years, hardly 33 years. I was brought up by my grandfather and grandparents, I should say. He virtually influenced my thinking and action in those years, and they are the impressionable years. And good habits of reading stories rich with high morals of Indian legends and mythology, adventures like the travels of, they were all part and parcel of the kind of thing that I got exposed thanks to my grandfather. Of course, Ernakulam in those years was having studded with night skies, which were really dark. There was no electromagnetic pollution in that place. So one could really see the stars studying the skies, excellent view of the Milky Way. And it really incited me, inspired me to look at the subjects like physics and astronomy. That was the genesis of my interest to work in this kind of a thing. And of course, the school was a very great experience, even though I studied for only 5 years in Ernakulam. The teachers were exceptional. I should only recapitulate one instance where the Ernakulam, the school I studied was the Ramavarma High School. It was started by the Cochin royal family. Their children were also attending classes with me in those years. And I could see they used to come down in a big limousine and sitting in one side of the class. But the most important thing is that the teachers never made a distinction between we commoners and the royalty. And we were all treated equally, equal seriousness with which we dealt with us. That's one thing I remember very well. Then I moved to Bombay at the age of, when I was getting into the 5th standard, around the age of 10. I had teachers like Muthuswami Iyer and Elizabeth Mathai. They were exceptional teachers. They were very caring and individually paying attention to our thinking and growth and things of that kind. Only one instant, they encouraged us to learn much more than what we read in school. So one of the things that happened to me in those years was to pick up the very interesting books that were split over in the streets of Matunga in Bombay. And they used to be available for 1/4 of a rupee in those years. I used to buy a lot of them, and I used to read things like fictions. It could be novels, it could be mythology, it could be legends, it could be even literature. So there was a very holistic way in which I picked up a lot of subjects in the process of reading those books from the streets of Matunga, what I picked up as a book. So this is the kind of a thing. Of course, I went to college. I had teachers like Professor Godbole and Gupte. They really laid the foundation for my understanding of physics and mathematics, which I remember and gratefully acknowledge today at this point in time.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kasturirangan. Your life, as you said, has been shaped by various circumstances, and people. What shaped your worldview at that time? I mean, was it this education, or was it any specific event at that time?
I think there was, to be very frank with you, there was not much of a planning in my mind. There was no internet. There was no other kind of thing to guide me. I should say my career in some sense in those years was a kind of a random walk process. Just pick up what happens to you and then try to do justice to that. So that is a kind of a thing. Of course, we had very good teachers. That is one good thing. In the college, we were taught by some of the very well-established academics, like Professor Simmons, who taught me electronics. He used to spread a whole table with instruments, and they used to teach how to connect electronics and how to make an oscillator work and things of that kind. Or even Professor Madhu Dandavade was my teacher. He was later on became, as you know, the deputy chairman of Planning Commission. He taught me quantum mechanics at Siddhartha College. So these were the kind of teachers, and they were very committed. But I want to talk about one personality in my life. Really, the transition happened because of him. That is the meeting of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. My interest to do PhD, my interest to do cosmic rays, and my interest to do areas like astronomy led me to talk to Sarabhai. He was at the Physical Research Laboratory. He had just founded the Physical Research Laboratory. He was promoting subjects like cosmic rays and atmospheric sciences. And he's the one who really, right from the day he interviewed me, in which he really grilled me to make sure that I love to do research, which he ensured subsequently, to guiding me to do an experimental work. He didn't want me to do theoretical work. He said that you have to wet your hands or work with team. And the third thing is, he finally, when I got my PhD and I was to go to US for a postdoctoral program, he said, no, you're going to work in India because we're going to start the space program. He inducted me. He was very persuasive as to how I should be working in the space, how it's going to be the beginning of a new era in this country, and how I could work. And it was, he made 3 steps, therefore. He guided me in the PhD program, try to make sure that they work in an area which gives me a very good futuristic direction for the type of things I can be responsible, and finally put me to a program which today, as you know, has really grown thanks to his vision and direction which he gave in those years, when he also told me that this is how it will go and therefore you work here. And because of him, I finally joined the ISRO and worked to the position that I finally came to.
Thank you, Dr. Kasturirangan. As the chairman of the committee of draft the National Education Policy 2020, which later on became the National Education Policy 2020, I would like to ask you one basic question, which is on India's total spending on education, which remains less than 5% at the moment. And while, of course, higher spending does not necessarily improve the outcomes, but 5% appears to be quite low. Do you find that there's a direct correlation between improvement in education and increased public spending? And is there a way that we can increase our expenditure on education in the presently and in the future, given our limited resources, of course?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because this is something that weighed in our mind right from the beginning. What is going to be the new policy and how is it going to be translated into the ground realities? And therefore, we also went into the little details of financing an affordable and quality education for all, which is a part of the last chapter of our bigger original draft version of the policy. What it did is, of course, we wanted to endorse and envision a substantial increase in the public investment in education, both from the central as well as from the state governments. The state and state will work together. They have to work together to make the final numbers more like 6% of the GDP. That is a kind of a thing. And this is, of course, we consider it as very critical, even though the 6%, there is nothing sacrosanct about the 6% number. But we knew that we need to keep at some level, and this is one number which has also been touted even in the earlier policies too. But what we need is a good, high quality, equitable public education system, which will support the India's futuristic social, economic, cultural, intellectual, and technical progress. And it is to be mentioned that we have to have this in consonance, of course, with the kind of things that the 1968 policy were enunciated, and subsequently also the 1986, 68 and 86. So NEP emphasizes does it's a public and social good. That is how we recognize the education, and therefore it is not for profit activity. We have said that in the policy. The other important aspect is we did look at what is the present state of the kind of a thing. If you really analyze the actual budgeted expenditure in 2017, 2018, it comes to something like 4.43 of the GDP. And there is a different mechanisms in which this funding comes through. One is, of course, the main funding coming from state and center. Then government guaranteed loan mechanisms for institution of higher education. You have philanthropy, corporate, individual, alumni, etc. Flexible student loans, performance-based matching grants, government and outcome-based government funding, use of technology to maximize philanthropic growth, for example, the crowdfunding, facilitating legislative reforms, and then collaborative arrangement with private sector in institution creation and operation. Then, of course, there are areas like gender inclusion fund, equitable quality education for girls, transgender. So there are many other areas in which this kind of a thing is there. If you now look at it with the 21, 22, and which is something like 93,000 crores, which people said was 6.13% lower than the previous year, there are certainly concerns, because this is not the number. The number, as I said, is more like 4.43% of GDP. When we talk of a 6% GDP or 20% of the overall gross expenditure ratio, we are still far off with respect to this. But there are allocations for the National Research Foundation. There is now the 15th Finance Commission's allocations and things of that kind. But on the whole, I should say that this has to be ramped up to 6% and beyond in the next 10 years. Why I'm talking 10 years is the 10 years, the time frame in which this particular policy will mature. And we need to ramp it up in steps. And of course, the 50 to 60% of the ramping up has to happen in the first 5 years to 6 years, not waiting for another 4 years. So these are strategies, and there are many areas, as I mentioned, where there are possibilities available. Private investments is there, philanthropic investment is there, the area alumni investments are there. Are many areas we are not tapped and optimized the resources with respect to that. But the other important thing which you raised, and which I think is extremely thing, is we can certainly increase it. It can produce a good quality infrastructure, teaching learning resources with well-equipped libraries, science laboratories, ICT infrastructure, better human resources with well-trained teachers and school leaders. All this is possible. But to say that this will all by itself increase the improved quality of the learning is fallacious. And we obviously need competency-based frameworks which emphasize quality parameters that define better acquisition of knowledge, skills, capabilities, may require less investment but yield better results. The optimization of resources is a growing economy like this is the need of the hour. And we have identified several methods of optimizing the resources and improving the quality. One of them, for example, is the school complex, where we can share several resources of multiple schools in a complex mode and still fulfill the overall objectives of the quality education and availability of all facets of the education. Or the use of other kinds of methods in the geographic vicinity, then continuous training and retraining of teachers. This is another area which doesn't need that kind of money, ensuring an engaging and relevant curriculum. And another important area, promoting effective learning pedagogies that instill cognitive and creative thinking with a scientific temper in students will contribute to the enhanced learning outcomes. These strategies are non-monetary in nature and not involving high costs, but will definitely transform and improve learning. But before I conclude this, being an optimist, I want to say that I expect that as this policy progresses in implementation, India should move from 2 trillion economy to a 5 trillion economy. A 6% would be a substantial part of the GDP going into the education. And we hope with support from private investors, philanthropists like you, certainly it would make a difference to education. I think it has to be all rounded. It cannot be focused on one sector, one segment, and one government to deal with this.
Very well put, Dr. Kasturirangan. Thank you for your insights. It is a very ambitious and progressive document, which lays the foundation, the path for India's education policy for the coming decades, and which are really going to be, I think, our best decades coming in. How did you go about thinking about this national education policy, Dr. Kasturirangan, where the youth, of India, ages of 0 to 14 make up around, they say, 26 to 27% of our population, and what macro goals did you keep in mind, and what governed your approach in deciding and formulating this policy with your team?
That's a good point. In fact, certainly, but one thing I want to start with in responding to your question, we really did not make the policy by keeping the population distribution by age in mind. But we did look carefully into data regarding the number of children in this age group that are out of school. This is one of the biggest challenge that we had to face in trying to come out with a viable solution. The NEP committee felt that the policy must ensure that every child stayed in school, received free education until grade 12, and that no child is let off. This is one of the important aspects of the policy studies. The extensive consultations, of course, we did find that RTE and the very good schemes that have been there certainly brought the children to school in large numbers. And in fact, I could say even the early part of the school is 100%. But then if you really look at it, there was the question of learning, which is what is called the foundational literacy and numeracy. And here is where there were several factors of deficiencies. Lack of early childhood care and education, ECCE as we call it now, early childhood care and education. The question of large number of children being hungry in school, there is a question of a midday meal, but not properly optimized. And also we have even recommended that there should be a minimum breakfast, because of the fact that you cannot have a children with an empty stomach going up to the lunch and then only start studying. So we need to make up for the morning, and then insufficient attention being paid to the achievement of the foundational literacy and numeracy, which is one of the, in fact, I should say at this stage, the foundational literacy and numeracy has now going to be made into a national mission and to address this question of something like 5 crores of children who are out of school. And it could, if we don't attend to it immediately in the next 5 years, we are going to add another 5 crores. So 10 crores is the kind of number that we are talking of. Obviously, we can't afford it as a country of this magnitude and the kind of ambition that we have. So this is one of the things. The second point I would like to make is that the RTE did not cover the age from 3 to 6. 6 to 14 is the one that we covered. And if you really look at the growth or the developmental profile of a child with respect to his brain, 85% of the brain development occurs by the age of 6. So if we virtually leave out this child in the RTE kind of a scheme, when by the time the 85% of the brain has grown, and these are the most critical thing, simply because of the fact the ability to comprehend, ability to learn, and ability to understand is very critical in this part of the brain growth period of going up to 85%. And Anganwadi and institutions like that, they not provide. They certainly take major provision with respect to the child care, nutritional health, mothers, and so on. But when it comes to learning processes in this period of 3 to 6, you have a serious problem. So that is one thing which we have suggested because of it, that the RTE be extended. We in fact recommended in the earlier recommendation, RTE to be extended to both sides, that is starting from the age 3 and going up to 18. But government has made it into a universal education approach because they didn't want to change the limits of the RTE in the present stages, because that becomes a right and they are afraid of providing it as a right. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it is, of course, the question of kindergartens and preschool classes, nursery. This is not a part of the governmental system. You go to Anganwadi. After Anganwadi, you go to the age, at the age of 5, you go into the education. And what happens is the 6 years, which we have really stipulated for the ECCE, which the child does not fulfill, And in the process, what happens is, it is most of the parents find that they have to send their children to private schools only because of the fact that the kind of Anganwadi school system doesn't provide the opportunities at the educational level. And this will then that the students cannot then come back to the government school. So you continue to do that. So this is one aspect of it. So what we have recommended, there are 2 or 3 important points I'd like to say in this connection. One is at least 1 year of preschool classes within the premises of primary schools. This is one. Second, Anganwadi workers to be given some training in early simulation and children education. And third, the ministries of women and child welfare and the Ministry of Education, they work in tandem. We need to have this working together. So we have, in fact, the ECC mission of the national mission is certainly going to have a task force which will consist of all the concerned ministries. So these are some of the things that has been done with respect to this. I would finally say at the time of commissioning, if you want to bring into the question of a long-term horizon and applicable 20 years, I would quickly summarize 4 or 5 points which will be relevant to your question. The first is to make use of the latest scientific research in the very idea of neural sciences and cognitive sciences in the early part of the education, and how the developmental trajectory of the child is identified was one of the key elements to coming out with the early school education and child care. And then the use of technologies in many other areas, its efficacy, this is another kind of a thing. So these are all part of the first one. The second one is to focus on strengthening the government school system. I mentioned about the problems of the government school system and the kind of quality. And more important, we want to strengthen the governmental school because they are the ones that provide education in remote geographies and poor communities. And we need to strengthen them to make sure that there is equitable and inclusive access of education in this kind of a thing. The third one is with respect to the NEPs aligned with the national development goals. So becoming a knowledge economy and developing sustainability and equitability is also another important criteria. The fourth one could be that the policy does not interfere with the constitutional role of state government. Fully, we all recognize that education is a concurrent subject, and so our policy has taken due note of it to make sure that the state governments have their rightful role within the constitutional provisions. The next one is in the higher education. There are a few additional considerations we have considered. Principle of reservation. They have been often asked us, what is the principle of reservation? We have not touched these areas because that's the domain of the executive. Every time they can bring it to the parliament, they debate that question of things. We have not touched that part of it. So we have not really, but we have addressed every area of reservation of the disadvantaged, the underprivileged, and those kind of a thing. How do we want to improve their law? That is one thing that has been very carefully gone into the policy. And then the regulatory framework for the higher thing, we have made sure that currently there are too many regulatory work and there is too much of accreditation and too much of granting. All of them cross each other. And so we have tried to restructure that part of it. And ultimately, of course, we need to get an idea of how the system works. So we had also suggested that we need to have a new National Education Commission, which is in a sense, we want to transform the existing Central Advisory Board of Education, CAB, consisting of experts in the field of, it is not a political system, it consists of experts in the field of education and also members of the government and implementing authority. So these are the macro details of the approach, the elements of it. It only gives you a flavor. I don't think it covers everything, but that's the kind of it.
Thank you, Dr. Kasturirangan, for giving us the macro goals as such of your NEP. Now I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into different issues of the national education policy. To start with, Dr. Kasturirangan, you call for the NEP 2020 calls for a shift from the present 10+2 system for ages 6 to 18 to a 5+3+3+4. So, and for ages 3 to 18. Furthermore, it calls for very good flexibility in course options so that, quote unquote, there will be no hard separation between curricular, extracurricular, or co-curricular, or among arts, humanities, sciences, or between vocational or academic streams. How will these changes affect overall learning And what are the larger outcomes you expect to see from these new approach?
I think this question is a very, very significant one because we spend a lot of time looking at the school education and its present deficiencies, lacuna, and the kind of things that we have not considered in trying to look at it in the context of new information that we have on the developmental trajectory of a child with respect to how it grows mentally and the ability to comprehend. So the policy has recommended transformative changes, what you said right now, that you're going to 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 from a 10 plus 2 system and structuring the school education from 3 years to 18 years is a major transformation from the one that we currently have. The advances, we are advances in the developmental, cognitive and educational psychology. Today, we have much better understanding of these aspects from the scientific point of view than we ever had earlier. So we need to address the teaching learning process of the youngsters in their early childhood. This is one of the central points. There is no point in just pushing out lessons and talks, giving them and make them to remember this in the rote learning process. Really, we should understand the teaching learning process. That is one thing we went into the detail. We consulted some of the best experts in this country with respect to the areas of early childhood comprehension, how their brain goes and so. So the cognitive sciences, neural sciences, these were all considered in this. And the 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, therefore, is based on a better understanding of the scientific basis, which provides insight into the child's learning trajectory from the birth to the secondary school. I must point out that the policy also, we have not left out the 0 to 3 years when the child is at home. We have even made a lot of studies and make certain types of prescription, which will help at the house level. The children can be attended to in a certain way, whether it's improvement, it's a pedagogical approach, play-based approach, and things of that kind. Between the age and 3, 4, I want to give a little elaboration to this because we have gone into so much of detail on this. Between the ages of 3 to 14, if you really look at it, the child gradually transitions from perceptual learning. It has the perception because he tried to look at people's signatures, the way you show your face and things of that kind. Then you go into the conceptual learning. And from the conceptual learning, you go to the prescriptive learning, where you start touching the book, you start hearing the teachers and things of that kind. And finally, you are able to deal with abstraction. And arithmetic addition can convert it to algebra kind of a thing. So you have these 4 elements to an educational system a child is going through. And from the age of 3 to 14, this developmental trajectory is factored into the foundational, primary, and middle school, the structure. There is conformity. And then to develop values, skills, capacities, knowledge that are relevant not just for today, but for the rapidly changing world, we must demolish this hierarchy. You mentioned about the curricular, no co-curricular, extracurricular, and things like that. These hard separations of various subjects we need to do away with. That's where we should see the knowledge as an integrated whole. It actually is. And understand its relationship and use the world around us. I want to say this with an emphasis because this principle is carried forward not only within the school education, but also for undergraduate education where applicable to higher education. So all the children will learn social sciences, humanities, physical sciences, mathematics, vocational education, art and music, and more, covering all dimensions of the human knowledge. That's the most important, because this is an integrated, holistic, liberal education that is required for a capable citizen of tomorrow. Designing such a curriculum will be seamlessly enabled also for transition of students for higher education. That's the other part of it. The final secondary school level, which is the 15 to 18 ages, student will explore their by the time it is able to comprehend the various aspects of life and how to go about it. Critically, it goes into the vocational education, for example, is introduced at this particular stage. Students are fully prepared to decide at the end of 15 years whether they will pursue a vocational profession or a higher education. The policy recommends mastery of at least one vocational subject at this period, a schooling system. And so ultimately, I would like to summarize. This is a schooling system recommended through this policy that respects natural developmental phases of a child will prepare our students for a better and higher education, professional education, and also for vocational careers. There is a supplementary question I'd like to ask. There are, sorry, I'm not able to hear you. Sorry.
No, you go ahead, Dr. Kasturi. You want to complete something or?
I thought you had a point with respect to how to improve the schools overall, but more important is whether the region. Oh, this is no. I'm sorry. That's a separate kind of a.
Yeah.
You want to talk about language, right?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the language part. The regional language. Of course, the British had their own motives to teach language. Macaulay wanted the English language more as to create a class of persons in India, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. So, that, I mean, whatever, there are advantages to English, but their motive was very different. And unfortunately, some of our traditional teaching methods and all took a backseat, and we looked at it as something inferior compared to the British way of teaching. You have advocated the medium of instruction to be in the mother tongue and the regional language of the state up to class 5 in the national education policy. I mean, we have diverse people, north, south, east, west. How would this improve the students' overall education, and how will they, for example, how will they adapt to on a transfer basis? How will a student adapt himself to such things? So,
yeah, it is one of the things that we received as not so positive response for the policy, even though we were clear why we were doing this. But to get back to the overall aspect of the language policy, which have enunciated in the policy in our NEP 2020, I want to say that language is one area, language education in our country. I think it has only deteriorated with the years. It has not improved at all. Take the case of the richness of the language, whether it is through modern languages, classical languages, and then you have the state languages, 22 languages of the 8th schedule, and things of that kind. We have a remarkable country in terms of the language diversity, its richness, and things of that kind. And we always saw that if you take a single classical language, Sanskrit, of course, Sanskrit is also a modern language as well as a classical language. But if you really look at it, it has more richness in terms of literature and writing than the Greek and Latin put together. That is the richness of a kind of one language that India possesses in it. If you look at all these kind of a thing and the provision of language learning, the policies have invariably boiled down in discussion in the public to whether it is two languages, whether I will learn mother tongue, whether I will learn English, or whether I will not be prevented from learning English, whether Hindi will be imposed. These are the type of standard questions on the policy. I would say that those who are interested to learn a little bit about the policy that we have enunciated, I think one should carefully go through the chapter on language, because I want to do this as a preamble, because I think not much has been learned in the whole process. So far as learning the language is a medium of instruction, then as a home language, as a local language, and things of that kind, we have taken into account the fact, I said in the beginning itself, the science of learning, the science of comprehension is something which has come to us with the new developments in areas of neural sciences and things like that. If you really look at the ability of a youngster to learn languages, it starts around the time he's born. In fact, the first set of science which he uses for the language, which you call as mother tongue or the local thing, the first thing the child learns, and he learns it with ease because that is ingrained in it. And so that is one thing on which we should recognize the child, if it is taken forward, there will be an ease to understand it, ease to communicate. The child will be able to do much more justice in terms of sharing its thoughts to the other person. So this is one aspect of it we recognize. The second point is the language growth of the brain really is substantial between the 3 years and about 8 years. If you really look at, there are nodes in the brain where these are specialized for the language, and these language nodes certainly get enriched as you learn more and more languages. There's the ability to absorb a lot of languages if you teach it at this phase of its life. And so whether we talk of 2 languages, and there have been debates in the public about whether it can learn more than 2 languages, that it can learn, I think it has got enormous capability to learn languages. That is not an issue in this period. Now, when you try to create that kind of a capability by exploiting this component of the ability, which you may call as a crucial social capability, and it has a cognitive benefit. If you really look at that, there is no reason why the child cannot be taught more than 1 or 2 or 3 languages, because it has the ability to grow in that direction. It has also the brain growth that is possible to facilitate it. And what is more important to me is, after the age of 8, if you want to learn more languages later on, whether you want to have a foreign French, you want to learn Chinese, you want to learn, there are always, the brain is ready because it has been already matured into a position of absorption. Now, these are things which are overlooked totally in trying to talk about 2 languages and 3 languages. We have considered this to say the 3 language is nothing, is something which is easy in terms of comprehension, number 1. Number 2, the child learns mother tongue or local language, or it could be home language, with ease in the early phase of it, because it comes in contact with it 3 years ahead of the regular language that you start learning. That is from 3 years onwards. So that is the second part of it. And third is, we have found that the comprehension of learning things in one's own language. For example, if you read, the Japanese do it, the French do it, you talk, most of those people, many of them are local laureate. They say that their first idea of comprehension came through because thinking in mother tongue. And then they started going into the other languages. So there have been a lot of such kind of work, and we studied those kind of a thing to make sure that we are not left out in the question of learning the languages. We are not left out to do justice to the richness of our language in India. And thirdly, we also give the type of the reality, ground realities. You should know that English is learned only by about 15% of the population, not more than that. And therefore, if you have the flexibility right from the age of 3 to learn language now, not from 6, and you have the flexibility to learn 3 languages, and you can have, English is not left out as a flexibility to learn this. So which answers in a sense your concern that if you move to the 3 language formula, whether you left out in certain opportunities, it will not, because the flexibility is very high. Mother tongue, English, you can have also a 3rd language from India, any other kind of a thing. And then of course, Hindi and other things are also there available to you, but they are not imposed. These are flexible. So this is the general thing I would like to say. We have done a lot of studies in this and consulted quite a lot of people, and also seen success stories about understanding this. So that is the basis on which this recommendation has gone.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kasturirangan. A supplementary to this is, of course, if you study in a regional language, do you think that would be a disadvantage for higher studies? I mean, let us say you do your basic thing in a regional language, and then you want to do your master's in English in IIT, or you want to go to abroad. Will that be a disadvantage?
No, because we are, I think the problem today is very valid when you ask this question, because we have given very poor attention to foreign languages. So if you generally look at it, when I was a part of a delegation to China, and we had to really hunt out a person who could speak Mandarin. If that is the level of the language comprehension in this country, we need to do a major overhaul of learning. English is no exception to this. At 15%, English is not a great language in India to be transactional for majority of the people. In fact, this policy will give them more opportunity to learn English than what so far they have been getting, number 1. We have also made sure that foreign languages like the French or German or Japanese, they should be all strengthened in various universities. We found that that is what the very weak link in the system that will be done. And most of these languages we studied for their functionality and fluency. It is not that you're going to become a language orator or you are going to become a literary figure. That you can do it on your own. But even for a functionality and fluency, there should be courses available across. This is a very weak system, so it is not withstanding the policy. We need to correct it, and the policy helps you to correct this question that you asked me. Sorry, I'm not able to hear you. It's muted.
Yeah, coming back to the next question on the NEP, one is advocating new teaching methods and like coding, which is mandatory in the NEP, but such things may require a large, expensive infrastructure and connectivity. And how does a public or government institution, municipal institutions, carry out such a type of teaching methods or coding, introduce coding to every school in India, because they will have limited resources, although it's very good. I mean, coding is very much required, but how do you envision they will be able to budget for this kind of expenditure?
Yeah. This is an interesting thing with respect to the initiation into the world of computing at the school level. It's an expensive infrastructure, as you say, but one can also look at it that there are research that have been conducted both in India and even countries like United States, which confirm the student can be taught computational thinking, which is a part of the educational recommendation. We have made a very major recommendation on computational thinking and using paper-based worksheets and many other kinds of methods. The initial learning of the computational thinking, coding and things like that, certainly there are cost-effective methods today available. But it takes you only up to a particular point. The curriculum exposes students to problem-solving methods that are aligned to what ways the computer will solve the problem. So that is not the issue. It gives students an appreciation of what computers can and cannot do. That is, other parties can do. Such a curriculum is also scalable with all the students, for students who are interested to do further in coding. But at a point will come when these methods have to transition finally into an infrastructure that demands computer labs, reliable power supply, backup, equipment maintenance, and all that kind of thing that goes with it, the peripheral thing. So the economics of providing these resources certainly are going to be a large scale, and certainly it's going to be challenging. I can't underwrite this aspect of the challenge that it may have. My hope is that if an initial exposure to computer coding and computational methods and learning a way in which the computer thinks and that you're able to think, that itself is a major milestone in the career of a youngster learning computational sciences. If he has to go for the next one, certainly we need to do that. My hope is in the next 5 to 10 years, the cost of per bit it is coming down. The cost of computation is certainly coming down. We would be able to take care of this in the years to come by, in a phased manner, induct the computer infrastructure into the learning process. I may mention in this connection, there are already the steps that are being taken. One example I will do, and that is with respect to the recommendation from the Department of School Education and Literacy. They are going to have a plan that will work with the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, the METI, for preparing an all-encompassing school educational digital infrastructure. The goal is to provide open, interoperable, evolvable, public digital infrastructure in educational sector that can be used by multiple platforms and provide point solutions. It is expected that this work will be initiated by the Department of School Education and the Literacy soon. In fact, it's not a futuristic idea. It's right now they're going to start this. School education, as you know, had already gone into the ICT over the years in many ways, but not in an extensive way in which you are discussing this question. As far as the DE content is concerned, certainly we have the digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing. Diksha is there. You have e-Pathshala is there, which can be also, now they are planning to integrate it into the Diksha, and NROER is there. And so the platform so far has been used as a supplementary to school education and as an aid to teachers for teaching and students for learning. The impact of pandemic, of course, Diksha has remodeled itself, as you know. So it's quite possible now that Diksha will be the central portion of the contents, and the initiative that Ministry of Education, Department of Education is doing with the Ministry of Electronics and the thing will lead to the complementary system of hardware and the platforms. And we hope that this will enable a system which will become affordable for a larger number of people. And of course, Diksha is also hosting, as you know, the training modules for nearly 42 lakh teachers in the country. We call it as a NISTA, National Initiative for School Heads and Teachers Holistic Advancement, which is a capacity building program for improving quality of school education through integrated teacher training. So these holistic systems, the national systems, all encompassing systems, I think should help to create a system which becomes affordable at the local level. That's what my hope is. I think it will succeed.
Excellent. I think, as you said, it is about getting the children to learn how a computer thinks and how they think, and they will adapt very fast given the infrastructure. My next question is about the higher level, college level, Dr. Kasturirangan.
Okay.
Where NEP is in favor of greater inter and multidisciplinarity and flexibility. As you know, when I did engineering, we had no liberal arts in my college in Bombay University. Yeah. You have in the NEP you have mentioned that even engineering college as IITs and others will move towards more holistic, multidisciplinary education with more arts and humanities, and colleges with arts and humanities will need to learn more sciences.
Yeah, that's right.
And also compounded an effort to include more vocational subjects and soft skills. I think this is really great. How will we go about providing this multidisciplinary and flexibility? I mean, it's fantastic.
This is a good question. The reason why, of course, I don't have to explain it to you, but I would like to say it in a very one single line, that what does liberal education really provide? It explores the remarkable relationship that exists between science and humanities, between maths and the arts, between medicine and physics and things of that kind. And surprisingly, it explores the unity of all fields of human endeavor. There is a unity. And so that is what exactly. And what does it do? It develops the capacity of human beings intellectually, aesthetically, socially, physically, emotionally, and morally in an integrated manner. So these are two premises in which we want to do this, because this is the need of the 21st century in terms of, you talk to 21st century skills, your ability to shift jobs. As Paris Zakaria says, job hopping will become a continuous feature in the future education, future job hunting and things. The ability to switch over is the most important. So that is where it is. Your important question is, how do we make sure that it is practiced in institutions? We have looked into it. It is something on which it is a very interesting aspect. There are what you call as an integrative methods of subjects to be brought into picture and studied to give a totality picture of the phenomena that you are looking for. Climate change, for example. You need to address the climate change with respect to the weather, the atmospheric sciences, the social sciences, the economics, and many other kinds of developmental civilizational characters and things of that kind. So you need areas of expertise in these kind of a thing, but they have to be integrated. The integrative part of the whole thing is the question on which we have not done much of a thing. There are certain integrative systems. For example, I think if I remember, certain aspects of integrative sciences are the role of science in society. This kind of things certainly has an integration of society and science, this kind of a thing. But if you have to do this, I think there are few areas. I would take up the most recent example, which is the development of the vaccine for the COVID. If you really look at it, as a COVID, it was done in a much faster time scale than the time scale in which topically we are accustomed to developing a vaccine, 8 years, 10 years. And here is something in which you do it within a year or something more than that. And you have already 5 crores of people who are vaccinated also in the country in this whole process. So here, what you try to do is you don't do a sequential way in which you do research. You try to develop the first part of it. You have biotechnology, there are the genetic engineering, there are manufacturing processes, there are chemical, there are many areas which ultimately comes into picture in trying to develop a vaccine. Now, the whole idea here is to make sure that can you split it up into parallel areas and you can bring them together. And while developing in a parallel approach to doing this so that you have a simultaneity about the progress of many of the elements of that kind of a development, you also make sure that they are the worst part of the whole thing in this kind of a parallel thing is, have you defined the interface properly between them? So in the computer sciences, as you know, the definition of a interface definition as an integral part of developing a software is very well known. So these principles of integrating multiple themes, multiple areas by this kind of an approach is something which one can adopt it. And so this should become now a practice to do. So this is one aspect of it I would like to say, in trying to bring in a kind of a parallelism and moving further, and then good dialogue between the various areas, but only in defining the interfaces. The second part of it is also the question of a culture that need to come for the school. So that is where probably you will be looking for an answer of that type. I want to teach my music, for example, in the case of a liberal education. Music has got aesthetics, you have got psychology, you've got physics, you have got there are several such things about music which are if you want to understand the music in a holistic manner, you need to hear physics, or you also need to hear the music psychology. You should also look at the aesthetics and things of that kind. So the people who teach are going to be different. But how do you bring those teachers together, interact so that they know precisely what they're going to teach? Because if I learn only physics and of the physics of the music and vibrations and things like that, that is not the complete knowledge about music in an integrative study and in a holistic education. So that is where the initial interaction between the teachers with respect to the multiple elements of such a study and what exactly each will be teaching and how the children can interact in the process of trying to get the integration concept in. This is another kind of a thing. This kind of experiences have been there in many places and in many teaching institutions. We need to expand this. We need to create a culture around multiple speakers, multiple faculty members interacting with each other, and ultimately serializing the parallelizing serial functions to what you may call as to accelerate the process of realization. These are some of the processes which probably one has to adopt to go for a liberal.
Excellent. I think we will get people who will find solutions, instead of one branch of engineering.
That's right.
We are creating solution finding graduates. Couple of last questions because we are running out of time, I know, and you're very busy. One is about the onset of pandemic. You touched upon it a bit. This whole process has made us switch to online education, which many institutions have followed, and some with great success and some with lesser success. Online teaching, it looks like going to become more and more common in the future. How do you see it being, fitting it into the larger scheme of things in the national education policy, and with India having lower connectivity now, and how will, and the cost being high, we have less resources. How will people not having online education get left behind, and how do we get them to be on par with others? How do we tackle this issue of online education? Dr. Kasturirangan.
Yes, this is a very important thing. Pandemic, of course, has produced a rapid shift towards online education. That we all know that how it has happened. And many of the tools teachers are using. One of the important things that one should recognize in the use of this, there is a sense of urgency of adopting whatever is available in the software. So what people found that the business environment has created a lot of software. So you create, you use those softwares, do some tinkering, and use it. They are not the optimal approaches to using softwares for distance learning. So this is something on which much work need to be done. And there is what we have tried to do is to make sure that this aspect of the teaching requirement, the software developments, as well as the technologies that go along with it, they are properly reoriented and whenever necessary rediscovered. Now the problem is whether are they the right one. There is a lot of people who will tout this kind of capability while selling it to the educational institution. So we have also created what is called as a National Educational Technology Forum, a consultative institution which will be a multi-nodal system, where any new areas of this kind of a thing, a new technology, a new software, a new approach, they are thoroughly evaluated with respect to its applicability in this country, its social capability, its social attitudes, its cultural aspects of it, besides, of course, economic sustainability and taking it forward in terms of scalability and so on. So this is one thing which we need to do. I say not the final word, it's only the beginning of a online learning, and as you said, with incomplete software capabilities derived from applications which are for other purposes. This is the second. And then if you really look at it, we do need, certainly there is a digital divide. So we need to make sure that that part of it, whether it is internet connectivity, internet enabled devices, a quiet study environment, these are all today grossly underestimated in its complexity to be integrated into an Indian total education system. We need to really go into the thing. What is needed at this stage? They have also tried out with what is called the blended learning. So where they have tried to study both the teaching in the class plus using it, but then that uses still the presence of the teacher. That is where the whole problem comes in. And lastly, the distance learning, where it's not purely in this thing. For example, ISRO started this EduSat. You try to create areas in this and you try to divide. But again, you need the other end, certain levels of technology and certain levels of capability. So the digital divide is certainly a current problem. We need to close it. Some of the things that I mentioned about the joint work between the Ministry of School Education as well as the Department of Ministry of Technology, Information Technology. We hope we will follow those kind of models to address the other part of it. And I can only say that there is quite a lot of research is currently going on. But to have an operational system which can be adopted both in an operational sense and also in a scalable sense and in an affordable sense, I think we still have to wait. I don't think I have a very clear-cut answer on this because the multiple choices of options are still existing, but I think the choices to be made certainly is not clear to me.
Thank you for your frankness, Dr. Kasturirangan. One question is, of course, about the teachers. Teachers are very important. They are our gurus, and especially in a place like India, the highest respect for our teacher. The gurukuls have been there from times immemorial. But in your thing, you have made some very interesting statements, and you mentioned in one of your interviews in the Hindu that we want to make the teachers a cadre, which is a very serious cadre, like a computer engineer, a mechanical engineer, and it's like like an engineering graduate or an IIT graduate or something. So how do we achieve this high-skilled teachers across India? Everybody is of a particular level, and not of a lower one. I mean, it's a great thing, but how do we do it, Dr. Kasturirangan?
Well, I think transformation of teachers into a cadre which provides modern education to children is no longer a question of a luxury. That will be very clear. If so, the teachers do require high quality content in terms of the inputs that they provide. We provide, whether it is related to pedagogy or teacher education, therefore need to have a standard which cannot be provided by the conventional TEIs and these kind of institution, teacher education institute. 10,000 of them giving fly-by-night certificate doesn't, it's not going to help you to improve the education. What is the next? Second, the teachers are not treated in the society as the best, as the intellectual one. On one side, you expect them to produce the most intellectual product of the country, a future of the country. On the other side, you don't recognize the people who are creating that particular. Obviously, their stature has to be improved. The third, modern developments include not just the kind of teaching that we are accustomed to. There are many new developments that are taking place, even things like artificial intelligence, expert systems, machine intelligence, and other areas, biotechnology, life sciences, even in areas like physics and so on, and cosmology and astronomy. So there is a need to make the teachers exposed to areas, modern areas, at the same level at which many of the undergraduates study, because this is an undergraduate education, the teacher's education. We found that there is no reason to keep the undergraduate education for the teacher to be different from the undergraduate education for a mainstream education, BSc, BA, this kind of a thing, or a professional education in engineering or medicine, or even legal and other kinds of education. What is the way? So we have also made sure that the higher educational institutions ultimately will be grouped into three major areas: the research universities with teaching, the teaching universities with the research, and autonomous degree giving colleges. So ultimately, these are the kind of things that can provide the most modern undergraduate education for any purposes in the country. In my view, if you ask me, this purpose could be a teacher, this purpose could be an IAS officer, this purpose could be a doctor, it could be a computer engineer. It could be something about holistic about this kind, because the knowledge system has now evolved in that fashion. So there is no reason to keep the teachers separately in another group of things. So we think they have to be elevated and put to institutions which also produces engineers and which also produces the bright scientists. And that is what the importance of going for a educational system where they are exposed to the best of the educational institution at the higher level. Now, if you really look at many of the universities, and they don't have very good, excellent centers of education in the university systems, IITs or any other Institute of Science here and so on. So we need to create centers of excellence in education. They will provide undergraduate education and higher postgraduate education. They will engage in research. And what is more important, in order to make those undergraduate, and besides, of course, working on communications, pedagogy and curricular framework, which are specific to the teacher education, there are many areas, like whether it is in humanities, whether it is in sociology, whether it is in sciences or mathematics or other areas of the same. You have to draw the larger capability of the institution. That is possible only when you go into a multidisciplinary institution. You can't do it in a silo in a particular. So our model for the teachers' education will be to put them to the higher education institutions. Higher education institution will have the centers of excellence in education. They promote teacher education at higher, at undergraduate, postgraduate, as well as a doctorate. They do even research. And they draw upon the overall capability of the university in imparting knowledge to the teachers. And that is the kind of teachers we need. We have provided 10 years to do this, 2020 to 2030, by which time all the teachers have to be in the 4-year BAd courses who have gone through this kind of a thing. I think a reasonable time frame of 10 years, certainly something that is workable, but we cannot, of course, cool our heels right now and start thinking that, oh, we have time and then we'll do. What you said is you raised a flag. We need to do it rather fast so that we get the right numbers at the right time for the institution that is looking for this kind of a capability. And we think it's possible to do it in 10 years, but there has to be a set of a mission and a passion to do this in the country. And they are going to be the heart of the matter, as we have put it in the title of our teacher's title in the policy, the heart of the matter. And they are heart of the matter.
Thank you so much. And I think what you have done in ISRO and everywhere is a shining example of, having everybody doing everything together, no silos. I think it's something which is wonderful. Sir, the closing question from me, and we have got a couple of questions from the participants. We ask these questions to everybody. What are your 5 personal mantras for success? Whichever way you would like to answer, Dr. Kasturirangan.
Okay. No. I think my earlier discussion with you and your own response that gave me that what you're looking for. And I thank you for that, because I think you wanted me to say it in a certain way. I will say something which it's more whether how much I have factored into individual successes, or if I don't want to call it, as I told you, within a first of a success. But whatever it is. First is, I strongly believe in the continuous learning. I think the world is changing very fast. Our ability to be updated on critical areas of various development that is going on in this country, and that too for a person of my type of attitude, you need a broader knowledge and a broader picture of things. And so continuous learning is something. Luckily for me, as I told you, this started on the streets of Matunga, early years of school, but today it has become an imperative and also a passion to learn new things. The second one is we have to share. You asked a beautiful question on the what you may call liberal education. The ability to sharpen the ability of integrating multiple dimensions of knowledge of a particular problem. A problem is not a silo-based single point knowledge. You need several, in the modern context, when you talk of a problem, it represents several dimensions of knowledge. How do you integrate it? And how do you come with a solution which reflects all the elements of multiple knowledge that you need to bring to solve that particular problem? When you do that, you recognize the solution that you get is not necessarily the most accurate, but the solution that you get is the most optimal. So that is the second point I would like to say with respect to it. The third one is I always look for interaction in which I would not like to miss an opportunity either to work with or associate with fertile and creative minds. This is something, luckily I did get an opportunity, whether it is Dr. Vikram Sarabhai or Satish Dhawan or MGK Menand. There were people of extraordinary caliber, and I could move with them, I could interact with them. I think it certainly, how much it has enriched me, how much it is something I cannot quantify, but certainly they had an influence in the way I think and try to act or understand issues. So this is the third point. And last one, and the fourth one I would like to say is we have in ISRO and many other places, we have handled big systems. So there is a question of success and failure. Success comes because thousands of people have worked in tandem on many things. One screw put in the wrong direction can kill the mission. That is the kind of a thing. So when it succeeds, I made sure never own up the success to myself. But when failure occurs, never try to search it with respect to who did it. Own it up yourself. This is the fourth one. And last, looks a little outlandish, but I have to say this. I have a lot of faith in spirituality and divine interventions in my life. many things which happened to me in my life, I really cannot explain. And therefore, the fifth one comes because of that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your mantras. I mean, this will definitely guide me definitely, and I'm sure many of all of us in India and the youth especially. Thank you so much. I've got a couple of questions. If you do not mind, couple of questions can we take, Dr. Kasturi?
Yeah,
Can
please.
Okay, I'm just going to choose. There is one from Mr. Ashok Mishra. I don't know whether it's the same Ashok Mishra, but yeah, I mean,
IIT?
I don't know. I mean, I can't make out. He's asked this question about. Oops, sorry. I think he's deleted the question. I just saw it. Okay, this is from Siddhi Mashelkar. I'm just using the name Mashelkar. I don't know any relation of Dr. Ram Mashelkar. What is your opinion regarding the role of how to improve the present scheme of ICDS in present COVID-19 pandemic in the elementary education?
What is the IC?
ICDS scheme in national education.
In the integrated, they are now coming, right now they are really working on many of the kind of the, you are talking of ICDS with respect to pandemic.
I think so. We can't see the person, but
No,
that's
the reason is there are several ways in which the ICDS has been addressed, integrated child development, this thing, with respect to pandemic. But the models are very different, and the models are different between what you may call the philanthropists, NGOs, the governmental approaches, and so on. So I also have not gone into the details of this aspect of an ICDS and the pandemic relationship, because I'm not gone into details of that kind of a thing at the present, because a very recent kind of a development and certainly has its own uniqueness, which I'm not comprehended fully. That much I should say. You are muted.
What is the new accreditation framework and independent authority to regulate public and private schools?
Yeah, okay. You know, the school education, of course, one of the things that we have done in the policy was to invigorate through effective regulation and accreditation mechanisms that would ensure the integrity and transparency and foster quality innovation for continuously improving. That everybody, this is the basis on which we started with this thing. Effective quality self-regulation and accreditation system is the one that has been instituted, and this would be applying to preschool, private, public, as well as philanthropic. And what is all next point is that the state and the union territories will set up an independent statewide body called the State School Standards Authority, SSA, which will establish a minimal set of standards for regulation and accreditation. What it will do is, with respect to a minimal set of standards based on basic parameters. The reason we called it as regulation light but tight, that's how we put that. It is mainly because we look at some of the basic parameters where the performance is concerned: safety, security, basic infrastructure, number of teachers across subjects and grades, financial probity and progress in achievement of learning outcomes, innovative classroom practices. This is, of course, you follow the national curricular framework for school education, and also the found processes of governance. This will be followed by all the schools, irrespective of the board of affiliation. The state school, the standard authority will establish an effective quality self-regulation or accreditation system to ensure that all schools, private, public, and philanthropy, follow these minimal professional and quality standards. That's what we wanted. Yesterday, of course, they would set up a mechanism of accreditation in consultation with the State Council of Educational Technology and Training, and schools and other organizations with capacity and credibility. It's a distributed kind of an accreditation system. Criteria for self-regulation by schools will be developed by the SSAs. And requirements and criteria for self-declaration. This is an important thing, self-declaration. There is lot, I want to say, in trying to do self-declaration, self-assessment, then trying to put this in the public domain, and then the public take that as the value for the school. These are all part of a system where we want to improve the trust, the management of the school, rather than trying to get into the school and start looking at every lecture books. That is what we went into the details of how do we operate it, and we found there is only one way: trust the school, trust the institution, and make sure that certain broad parameters in which these schools or the institutions are able to give you the satisfactory answer should be good enough to make sure, because there is also a public accountability, the public exposure, the stakeholder who is part of the public, they will also get the same information. And between this kind of a system, as well as the public accountability as judged by the public, I think it is good enough for making sure that a light but tight system for education accreditation, for both regulation and ultimately, of course, for the accreditation, which depends on the regulation, and between the two is possible to do. So we have come out with that kind of a thing. I think it should work. There have been questions on the public judging and school ability and things like that. Ultimately, I think we have shirked the responsibility ourselves as public in trying to pass judgments on various institutions. I think it is time this particular policy at least wants certain level of public scrutiny of the performance of the systems. There is no reason why we should not do that. There are enough knowledgeable people outside the regular system to deal with schools and understand their performance.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasturirangan, on behalf of Board of Trustees, the President, myself, Dr. Mashilkar, and all of us. We would like to thank you very much for the precious gift of your time and your grace. And thank you so much for answering all the various questions. These are very complex things, and only you could have done such a brilliant job of this NEP with your team. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights into the national education policy, and may our country grow from strength to strength. And thank you once again, and we would like to invite you to our International Centre Goa post-pandemic, whenever things improve. Once again, thank you very much, sir. God bless.
Thank you, Raj. Thanks a lot. It was wonderful interacting with you.
Thank you, sir.